pig came and it ate all of the potatoes, or ate most of his potatoes, and he had just had enough of it at this point. So his solution was to shoot the pig. Alrighty guys, so here we are, we're on the ferry, BC ferries, similar to the Washington State ferries. We're gonna just weave through the Gulf Islands until we get out into the Georgia Strait, and then we go across the Georgia Strait to Vancouver, and then that will bring us into Tawasin. But the San Juan Islands are just across the strait, a few little islands in the middle of it, and the San Juan Islands are the American islands. And in 1859, there was a boundary dispute up here about who owned it, Britain or America, which one would lay rightful claim. So they ended up having this war called the Pig War. Basically, there was an American farmer, Lyman Cutler, who settled on the island. He had potatoes, and he basically was growing potatoes on the island, doing his thing. And then on the other part of the island, there was an Irishman. Charles Griffin was working for the HBC, and he was the Irishman who owned the pig and was sheep farming. The Hudson's Bay Company was using the island for sheep ranching, and that's where he was doing. He was living on the island doing sheep ranching, and then Lyman Cutler came, lived on the other side of the island, kind of a thing, right? They each had their own side, and the pigs would roam freely, and then this one pig kept eating his potatoes. The first couple times they ate the potatoes, or tubers as they called them, and nothing really happened. He obviously got mad and was upset, but it was nothing like, okay, this is a final straw kind of a thing, right? And then one time the pig came and it ate all of the potatoes, or ate most of his potatoes, and he had just had enough of it at this point. So he shot the pig and killed it, and it was a whole thing, and Griffin got really upset. So then after this pig was killed, there was a huge back and forth between, militaries, America and Great Britain, where they were both arguing with each other, and the American said that he would compensate the guy for the pig, pay him $10. The guy asked for $100, which back in those days was a big deal, and he said not a chance. So then it started this whole military escalation. Nobody actually died in it. There was no human casualties. Obviously the pig got shot, but it was just basically another argument between the United States and Great Britain, who were arguing for land. Because, basically in a nutshell, Americans are just British people that decided to leave the empire, Great Britain, go off on their own and start a brand new one, known as the United States of America. So they had a lot of the same ideologies behind their methods for, taking this land or taking that land. So this all occurred on San Juan Island. It was just another border dispute. There was quite a few, actually, because whenever there was a gold discovery or something, the Americans would always try and claim, oh, well, we got enough people coming up here now, and we actually think we're going to take this, right? Like Rock Creek, for example, was another area where they were just basically like, yeah, we're going to take this, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And then Governor Douglas sent the Royal Engineers over and said, no, this is Canada, right? We ain't having any of that. The Americans had their own trails coming into Canada that they would just use. They wouldn't follow the border policy. They would mine without a license, bring guns and everything in. So there was a ton of activity around here of both British and American settlers. The Americans looking to expand their empire, looking to get as much land as they possibly could. The Oregon Treaty of 1846 laid out the boundary in the west all the way to where Point Roberts is, right? And that's why Point Roberts is an enclave kind of cut off from the rest of America, because it was below the 49th parallel. And then when the Oregon Treaty was signed, they arbitrarily decided that the 49th parallel line would be the border, and Point Roberts happened to be, even though it's connected to the Canadian part like Vancouver, it would become part of America because it was below the 49th parallel. That's caused problems for people in Point Roberts and stuff over the years. And, it's a big problem now with everything in tourism, and Point Roberts is really struggling, which sucks, but America wants to play games, right? They find out Canadians don't play around. And so these were heavily contested, even with the Oregon Treaty being established. This war happened about 13 years after, and it was very, very contentious. They were basically saying the Americans that these islands are ours, and Vancouver Island included, which was the capital of the colony of British Columbia. For a while, Americans said that should be ours. It's below the 49th parallel. Victoria's like 48 degrees below, so it's like not going to make a big difference, right? You know how much further south, but it does make a difference to the Americans and the British. And at the time, the British were basically like, no, this is our island. These are our the Gulf Islands that we have as Canadians. These are our islands. Not a chance. And the British were actually eyeing the San Juans, and they wanted to get the San Juan Islands. Now, on the other side of the coin, the Americans were saying the San Juans and Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands are all of ours as well. Anything below 49 degrees belongs to America. To which the British said no. Not much in the way of ores on these islands. Taxada Island has a little bit of quarrying and stuff like that, limestone quarry. But Salt Spring, for example, doesn't really have much in the way of mining. Not even really much forestry here, guys. The Gulf Islands are weird. They're small and kind of hard to access. There is an interconnected ferry network, which we will start looking into more. So you can get the ferry to Salt Spring Island and then either go from Vancouver, and then you can go from Vesuvius to basically Duncan Crofton area, or Fulford, which will take you down to Victoria. Like when you're just about to get to Tawasin, you actually briefly cross into the United States. So your phone will go off for roaming and it'll say, welcome to the United States of America. Because if you look on the border, like a 40, almost a 45 degree angle line that jots down, and that kind of encompasses the islands. But there's this section of water right outside Tawasin, the ferry terminal in Tawasin, that is considered American waters. So as you're departing Tawasin, or as you're coming into Tawasin, right just before you get into the terminal, or just after you've left, your phone will ping and say, welcome to the United States. You know, roaming charges and all of that apply, right? And then everybody freaks out. Oh no, but it's just like you're not really in the States, but you're passing through the water. So this whole area is intimately connected. The Haro Strait's another one that kind of separates the San Juans from the Gulf Islands. There's all kinds of little mini straits. The big ones are the Juan de Fuca, which is named after Juan de Fuca, the Greek ship explorer who went down the Juan de Fuca Strait, or the Strait of Anian, as he called it. And they were initially looking for the Northwest Passage. Everybody wanted to find the Northwest Passage. France wanted to find the Northwest Passage. Spain wanted to find the Northwest Passage. Great Britain wanted to find the Northwest Passage. They were all looking for the Northwest Passage. And so when Juan de Fuca was exploring the Strait of Anian, he thought that it was potentially the Northwest Passage. There's a lot of Spanish influence up here, like Galiano, Taxada, Quadra, and all of these names. These are all Spanish influenced names because the Spaniards were up here exploring this region well before the British were, but they built a fort at Nootka Sound, but they had issues with the First Nations. They didn't get along too well with the First Nations, so they got kind of run off. The fort Nootka Sound didn't do too well. So then the British kind of took over and assumed that role. But then when America kind of became its own thing, America started putting its eyes up here too. And then they were like, well, maybe there's something we can get out of this too, right? Everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie, basically is what it comes down to. So you'll see a lot of Spanish influence here. What happened was they sailed up from Mexico, the west coast of Mexico. They sailed up through California, Oregon, Washington, and then they got here. And then they went through this strait, and like I said, Juan de Fuca thought maybe this would be the Northwest Passage, but it didn't really pan out. And then in the 1700s, Captain George Vancouver, he came here and he did that for Britain, right? He was the guy for Britain. So Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, is named after Captain George Vancouver, who kind of charted this whole area. He drew up maps, which for a while were kind of the maps of choice in the region if you wanted to navigate. And then in the 1840s, another fella, an American, he kind of came and changed the game, made them a little more accurate, because they were super inaccurate, and a lot of the problems was nobody knew where anything was. They were trying to get the border established, but they had a rough idea of like where all the islands were and where things are. Imagine being in the 1800s and trying to figure out like which is where and what's what, and is that Vancouver Island there, and like what's that island, and what's there. So it was kind of a mishmash of like a whole bunch of different things, and they were trying to figure out what was what and just draw out the map pretty much at this point. So, and Spain didn't really do much of that. They just came up here, chucked it out, ran into issues with the First Nations, found that it was very cold and not, Spanish kind of southern climate that they wanted. And then so they basically left. But they did leave behind a lot of traces of their travels here. Let me take a look at the ferry. There's the bridge right up there, the captain and everything. You can see the little ferries skirting along to the different islands. Galiano Island is nearby as well, another Spanish influence. And then as you go up the island, there's more Gulf islands like Quadra, Sonora, Hornby, Denman. And they all have like little ferries that go to them. You can take the ferry up on the north part of the island from Vancouver Island over to the Sunshine Coast. And that takes you to Powell River. And then you drive from Powell River kind of east along the edge of the mainland coast. It's called the Sunshine Coast. Some pretty interesting stuff. They're not really much in the way of mining either. It's more of a logging show. A lot of artisanal businesses, artists. Very Pacific Northwest day in the fall here. Punching our way through. We're just going to go around the bend and come out, and then we're basically out of the Gulf Islands. That's Galiano Island. And then this is Main Island. This is the last little avenue / strait that we got to go through. And then we'll be out in open water and then heading towards Tawasin, just straight shoot right across to Tawasin. Beautiful cottages, man. Having a cottage on some of these islands would be absolutely fantastic. It'd be super remote and hard in its own way, but also really easy and peaceful in other ways. But this is basically the end, guys. And then once we get out here, we're going to be in the Georgia Strait. And then you can actually see Vancouver and Tawasin across the way. And then we'll be back in good old Vancouver. So if you like this kind of content, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit that bell icon to get notified. Leave a comment. Who knows? Maybe one of you guys got a cottage out here, or we live out here on the islands, make a comment. Always love hearing people's stories. Thanks for watching. And Sasquatch Prospector out.